Student societies are incredibly strong and across the university organise terrific academic and cultural events, and the Oxford India Society is one of the biggest and the most active, and this is a perfect example of the energy and the enthusiasm of Oxford students. And I am particularly pleased to be kicking off this event about India and to celebrate and strengthen the links between the UK and India, and very much between Oxford and India. Oxford recruits, of course, its students from all over the world and conducts research partnerships all over the world. But there are very few countries that stand out for the breadth and the depth of our ties that stand out more than India. And so it's a pleasure to be celebrating that today. And of course, as we look at India towards the dying embers of 2012, we see, as all of you do, much untapped potential in India, where the population is huge and growing, where the economy is strong and growing, and where the universities and research excellence are also strong and improving on a monthly basis. And I think it's fair to say that Oxford has a very special relationship with India because we have many things in common. We share an uncommon passion for higher education. And I don't have to tell an audience like this that India's IITs already have students in them who are as good as any in the world. I learned long ago that it is much harder to get into the leading IITs in India than it is even to get into Oxford. And of course we see in the developing and evolving world of higher education in India a host of new institutions that are rapidly expanding and improving. And let me just give one example. 2 days ago, I met with the Vice-Chancellor of O.P. Jindal Global University, which is located just outside Delhi. And JGU is 4 years old. It's just graduated its first cohort of students, and it's already building a strong faculty with a number of different key schools developing. And that strong faculty of O.P. Jindal Global University includes a significant number of Oxford graduates, including the Vice-Chancellor. And it's developing a reputation as a serious player. And of course the purpose of our conversation was to explore in a rather intriguing way how a 900-year-old university might develop links and collaborate with a 4-year-old university. And I think that represents many of the different challenges and opportunities between Oxford and India. And of course there's no question that Oxford and India, we share many cultural traits, many cultural similarities. One only has to think of the love of tea and cricket between Oxford University and India. Those cultural traits, I have to say, go further than that. All of you know the great philosopher and Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, who was an Oxford professor, an Oxford teacher here a number of years ago. And of course this audience, you all know that wonderful book he wrote called The Argumentative Indian. Well, I don't know if anyone has written a book called The Argumentative Oxonian, but let me say it would be a very accurate and appropriate book, as we all know, in a university that loves debate and argumentation. But let me say that book, I suspect, will be written before too long. And that link to cricket and that link to the modern contemporary India very, very much continues to this day. I had an opportunity to address Indian MPs who were visiting, and Minister, we were delighted to meet you yesterday. And I pointed out to them that one of the events that I enjoyed most in this last few months was a very special event. It was celebrating a great Indian cricketer, Tiger Pataudi, who sadly captained India, of course, but also was a great Oxford cricketer in his time. He died too young. He died last year, but it was a pleasure to celebrate the importance of his life. And his family came, and some of you here will know that the son of Tiger Pataudi is Saif Ali Khan. And Saif Ali Khan visited with his then fiancée, Kareena Kapoor, and I keep up with Bollywood. I know full well, was it 3 days ago? The wedding of the year took place in India, but we had a precursor in Oxford with Saif and Kareena visiting Oxford and enjoying this great city. Now, the links with India, of course, go far beyond cricket and Bollywood stars. And, of course, the most important link is that of research and collaboration. We have a long tradition of research and collaboration in research. Look, for example, at the Ashmolean Museum, and we see there some of the most glorious art and artifacts from Indian culture and Indian history. But research in a great university like Oxford is always about the modern day challenges, and I'm delighted that there are so many different examples of projects, collaborative projects between Oxford University and research institutes in India. Let me mention just 2 or 3, I could mention a score of them. The Young Lives Project, which involves the study of thousands of youths in India to understand the dynamics and consequences of childhood poverty. I'm delighted that we have representatives here today, the physicists who are collaborating across India and Oxford on a range of fundamental research questions. I visited last year on a trip to India the Tata Institute for Fundamental Research in Mumbai, and we celebrated this wonderful experiment that's going on where neutrinos, subatomic particles that pass through matter, neutrinos are being fired from Oxford through the Earth and are being detected in a salt mine deep in Tamil Nadu through the collaboration of Indian physicists and Oxford physicists. A very exciting project. And just a third example, when I was in India earlier this year, in Delhi, I visited the All India Institute for Medical Sciences, and saw a wonderful collaboration called Indocs. And it's a link between India and Oxford focused on cancer. And many of you will know there are certain cancers that are particularly prevalent in the Indian population. One of them is gallbladder cancer, that's relatively rare in Western Europe, but it's also an opportunity to bring the power of clinical research, of genomics, modern molecular biology to bear on the origins of cancers in India, and also the development of new treatments for cancer. Let me say, one of the great strengths of the links between Oxford and India is represented by many of you here this morning. It is our Indian students, and we are thrilled that this is a large and a fast-growing group of our international students, and I'm pleased that on my trip to India we made a major announcement of a policy change, which was that Oxford University in this admission cycle and into the future will accept Indian secondary school qualifications for undergraduate entry into Oxford. I was thrilled because the press coverage was enormous of that announcement. Now, I know Indian press, I suspect, quite well, not as well as all of you, and to get positive coverage is very difficult in the Indian press, and we had very strong and positive, and let me say, applications from India are booming as a result of that announcement. There are so many other things I could say. Time is too short this morning, but let me just mention one. A very important part of the link between Oxford and India is that great institution, Oxford University Press. Oxford University Press, it's a department of Oxford University. It is one of the means by which we propagate knowledge, and it has existed in India now for 100 years. And on my trip earlier this year, we had a birthday celebration for Oxford University Press in India, and that birthday celebration was graced by the presence of the Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh, himself, of course, a graduate of Oxford University. And it was a great pleasure at that point to celebrate not just the role of Oxford University Press, but the role of Oxford graduates, Oxford alumni, over so many years in the life, in the politics, in the culture, in the advancement of India. And so we look forward very much to that role continuing. There are now more than 1,500 Oxford alumni in India, and we saw many of them on this recent trip to India. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think today we're celebrating many things. We're celebrating the historical connection between Oxford and India. We're celebrating the links that exist and have existed for so many years, focused on scholarship, on knowledge, on research. But I think we are also very much celebrating the potential for strong ties between Oxford and India to grow and to have a very positive effect and benefit as India grows and changes and takes an ever stronger place onto the world stage. And so, as Vice-Chancellor, it's an enormous pleasure for me to welcome our speakers this morning, who will be talking about the topic of Oxford's role in strengthening Indo-UK relations in the next decade. And it's a pleasure for me. I'll introduce each speaker just before they come up to speak. And the first speaker is Professor Tapan Rai-Chowdhury. And Professor Rai-Chowdhury is Emeritus Fellow at St Antony's College. He has a long and illustrious teaching career at Oxford University, retiring as the Professor of Indian History and Civilization. He's the author of several books, including most recently an English translation of his popular and insightful memoirs, The World in Our Time. And it's a pleasure to welcome Professor Rai-Chowdhury to this stage.
Chancellor, colleagues and friends, it is not a good idea to open any speech with an apology, but I have to, because the non-paper I am going to present is the result of a series of misunderstandings. The misunderstandings mainly due to the fact that I don't come frequently enough for lunch or dinner to the college. Otherwise I would have known what this conference is really about. I understood, apparently mistakenly, that the seminar was about Indo-British relationship, and I was to speak on the period of British rule in India. And I prepared my non-paper, fortunately a fairly brief one, on this understanding on the era of British rule, which itself is an impossible task. To summarize in a few minutes the history of 190 years, Indo-British relationship during the 190 years of British rule in India. Let us first try and understand the extreme complexity of the subject. First, the conquest did not happen in a day. The Battle of Plassey, 1757, marks the beginning of the process, but the same battle merely transferred effective political authority to the English East India Company in Bengal, Bihar and Orissa, while indigenous rulers continued to rule over other parts of India. In fact, even in 1793, Lord Cornwallis, the Governor General, signed himself servant of the Mughal emperor. Though in fact he was servant only to the English East India Company and the British Crown in Parliament. During the intervening years, a varied bunch of indigenous authorities, some very strong, like the Mysore kings, other mere roi fainéants, like the Mughal emperor, ruled over different parts of India. The conquest was a slow, grinding process. Effective challenge to British power ends only in the 1820s with the defeat of the Marathas, the real challengers to the British for succession to the Mughals. British rule in India may be said to have been firmly established only in 1802 with the entry of Lord Lake in Delhi and the reduction of the Mughal emperor to the status of a subordinate pensioner of the company. Though the acquisition of the Punjab, destined to become the sword arm of the British in the East, had to wait another half a century. The process of conquest was really over only about a year before the Great Rising of 1857. The great variety of responses to the British presence should be obvious from the juxtaposition of two facts: the great enthusiasm of the Bengali middle class for Western education and its patron, the British rulers, and the sullen resentment of the North and Central Indian peasantry, which found expression in the massive rebellion of 1857. In the same year, the Presidency College was founded in Calcutta, as well as the 3 universities in the 3 presidencies. The history of Indo-British relationship hence covers a dozen distinct stories. We can hope to trace at best some of the main trends. Let us start with Bengal and the eastern provinces. The sheer greed of the company's servants, an uncomplicated pattern of loot through every available means, led to a spectacular famine which, according to the evidence of the company's own servants, killed some 1/3 of the region's population and an equal proportion of its cattle. A blow to the economy from which the agriculture of the region has not still recovered. This event did not endear the British to the peasant masses. There were several popular risings, all of course crushed without difficulty. The Bengali middle class Hindus, who were just emerging as necessary collaborators, remained staunchly loyal. Their numbers and their loyalty increased with time. Fortunately for them, by the early years of the 19th century, they also developed an avid interest in Western education, which altered their view of the world. In the varied spectacle of Western culture, they focused not on what came closest to their habits and practices, like the Catholic faith with its elaborate rituals, but what was totally alien to their culture, namely individualism, rational criticism of their own socio-cultural practices, democracy, political freedom, and values one associates with 19th century liberal and radical movements. Nothing could be farther from the usual components of Indian civilization. This implied a total rejection of inherited ways among sections of the young, popularly known as Young Bengal. The new English-educated members of the Bengali middle class were loyal admirers of British rule, but not blind to its monopoly of power and selfish greed. Elsewhere in India, there were many risings against the company's rule, but all, of course, successfully crushed. The horrors of the Bengal famine were, however, not repeated anywhere else, except that the ravages of Haidar and Tipu left the British territories in the south quite devastated. The British need for a class of people who knew English, and on the Indian side, the awareness of career opportunities for them created by that need led to the emergence of a new middle class. First in the presidencies, then in the rest of India. The new class was steady in their loyalty to British rule, though as the pioneers of modern political consciousness, they were also the first to be critical of British rule. One fact was soon very clear to them, that the British desired a monopoly of power and all the higher administrative posts. The highest administrative posts under the Mughals were open to Indians, Hindu and Muslim. This was obviously not the case any longer. And the extreme racism of the British, which projected the Indians as an inferior race and their civilization as childish, was received with great bitterness. The Anglo-Indian agitation against the so-called Black Act, which empowered Indian magistrates in the countryside to try Europeans, brought into the open the extreme nature of that racism. So pervasive was it that James Mill refused to believe that algebra was invented in India. They were too stupid for that. The 18th century excitement over Sanskrit language, literature, and the wonders of Indian civilization had given place to an unqualified sense of superiority in the age of the utilitarians. The rising frustration of the politicized Indians first gave birth to organizations meant to represent their grievances to the British public. There was still a lingering faith that if the Queen in Parliament knew how actually India was governed, British sense of justice would see to it that the unnecessary evils were rectified. The rebels of 1857 who took to arms do not appear to have shared any such middle-class faith. It is not possible to discuss here the manifold causes of the discontent eventually manifest in the rising. One thing is, however, obvious. Unlike the educated Bengalis, the power elite in northern India treated the rebels as heroes and martyrs. I do not know if this strengthens their claim to be the first fighters for independence. The first nationalist consciousness, very much an urban matter, was entirely loyalist in outlook and hoped that representation to the Queen in Parliament would eventually secure British justice for India. It was the ideology of a collaborating class. Though anger over the partition of Bengal, a purely administrative arrangement, partly intended to reduce the influence of the politicized Bengali Hindus, was channeled into an anti-government agitation, which contained a strong element of violence. Anti-imperialist nationalism was born. The indigenous politics of India has been explained in terms of an eagerness of the collaborating classes to have a share of the government's favor. And, and of course, there is a basic truth in this formulation which cannot be questioned. Competition between the haves and have-nots of shares in favor was provided the fundamental dynamics of Indian politics, including nationalism, it is suggested. As cooperation and consent were the foundations of British power in India, the basic truth of this thesis, despite many criticisms, remains. Except for one thing, organized action for the attainment of independence under Gandhian leadership cannot be described as cooperation by other means. It mobilized the popular aspirations through propaganda, especially propaganda by action and through martyrdom, and eventually it secured independence from a Britain seriously weakened by the Second World War, especially her initial defeats at the hands of Japan. There were many takers of power at the time when power was actually transferred. But people who had been imprisoned until about a month back were the people to whom the power was actually transferred. This showed a capacity for political shrewdness and foresight among the decision makers in Britain, which was rare in the other colonial power countries like France in North Africa and Holland in Southeast Asia. One must not forget that the withdrawal of the British resulted in the creation of more than one state. The politicized Muslim largely stayed away from cooperation with the British. Eventually, as and when they joined the race for power, one section among them trod a separatist path, though they did not command the adherence of the majority until the mid-40s of the 20th century. The British authorities, originally suspicious of the Muslims as the elements from whom they had seized power, began to take a more favorable view of their aspirations as potential allies against the nationalists. Some bureaucrats surely thought of encouraging their separatist aspirations, which evidently eventually led to the emergence of Pakistan. There is a hard grain of truth in the theory of divide and rule, though it is more correct to say that the Indians divided without any external assistance, and the imperial rulers eventually took advantage of that division. The end results were neither intended nor did it further British interests in the subcontinent. Thank you.
Professor Ray Chowdhury, thank you. Please don't apologise. Our topic this morning are the ways in which Indo-UK relations can be strengthened in the next decade, and understanding and basing those initiatives on history and the foundation of the relationship is absolutely key. So it's an important start to this morning's discussion. Let me now bring to the podium Mr. T.R. Andiarajina. T.R. Andiarajina is a senior advocate at the Supreme Court of India and has been Solicitor General of India from 1996 to 1998, and the Advocate General of Maharashtra from 1993 to 1995. He's one of the most experienced and respected members of the Supreme Court Bar and has recently completed 50 years as a legal practitioner. He's also the author of several books, including most recently a landmark book on India's most celebrated constitutional law decision on the basic structure doctrine. Mr. Andy Aragina.
Thank you very much, Professor Andrew Hamilton. And ladies and gentlemen, it was always my ambition one day to speak to an audience in Oxford. I could not, as a young student, afford to come to Oxford. I came from a very straitened family who couldn't afford the fees to be paid at Oxford. But I always harbored an ambition that one day or the other I would come to Oxford. To a certain extent it was fulfilled by my son, who became a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. And I always had some inclination to give a lecture at Oxford. My wife went to Harvard. That's why it sticks in my mind. But today, I'm grateful to Agya Sen Gupta. An accidental meeting with him in Delhi has resulted in my being invited here. I am a lawyer, and as a lawyer I would like to now today speak about the relationship which has developed over the last 2 centuries between the United Kingdom and India. And it's an amazing story. It's hard to believe to many people that how much this in India of the 21st century, its legal structure, its political structure, its basic principles of law are based upon the English common law and the English institutions today, which go back to the 17th and the 18th century. It's almost hard to believe because today we take it for granted. Young people in India don't realize that our roots are in English law, in English institutions. And it's the most amazing development in history when you go back to think how this could have happened and how a small nation like the English nation, thousands of miles away, has inspired and has given the roots of our development to 1 billion people in India. You remember the Weimar Republic had a constitution, excellent one, but it collapsed because it didn't have the foundations of law. We in India developed our Indian constitution, and it's strange to say, but the foundations of that constitution are basically a law which the English Parliament gave, the 1935 Government of India Act. And behind that act is all the great common law, the English statutes, the traditions of the English institutions. So today if a foreigner comes and he is simply amazed to see after 60 years of independence, everything is English. From the moment he lands at the airport, everything is spoken in English, all the signs are in English, all the development, the institutions are English, not merely tea and cricket as the Vice Chancellor said. But it is like that. I mean, it's amazing that we have such a vast country with so many linguistic states. If you go from the length and breadth of India, what's the lingua franca? It's not Hindi, it's English. In Tamil Nadu, which is South India, if you speak Hindi, it's not understood. But if you speak English, they respond with you. And today, nobody speaks today of a change of the language. The constitution said that we would sooner or later replace the English language with the Hindi as a national language. It hasn't happened. So this is an amazing situation which few people seem to realize. And the reason behind that is our acceptance of the common law of England and the English parliamentary forms of government. Now few people, and there's a number of students here of law who must know that this English common law is not codified law. It's more a customary law. And it was brought by the Britishers here as persons who conquered India and who introduced the law as a conquerors in India. And the flexibility of that law was such that it became adapted to the Indian conditions. We have the customary English law adapted to what we call a formula of justice and good conscience. And it was adapted that way. But principally, you would be surprised to know that it was the common law which was brought in India. Now, one of the great architects of our Indian Penal Code, which is an amazing code, it was way back formulated in 1860 by the great Lord Macaulay. He was a member of the Law Commission. Lord Macaulay was a highly pessimistic man. He said he had a very poor notion about Indian education and Indian learning, and he justly attacked it at that time. But he pessimistically spoke about India. And I quote his words. He said in the House of Commons in 1833, "It may be that the public mind of India may expand under our system," that's the English system, "till it has overgrown that system, that by good government we may educate our subjects into a capacity for better government, that having become instructed in English knowledge, they may in some future age demand English institutions. Whether such a day will come, I do not know, but never will I attempt to avert or retard it. Whenever it comes, it will be the proudest day in English history." Here was a pessimist who never imagined that this would come true. And today, the whole of English common law, English institutions permeate India. How much is this true? You remember how the Roman law was introduced in the countries which were conquered by the Roman Empire. To a certain extent, that is true of India, even greater. And that's why people like Lord Bryce and Lord Holdsworth spoke about the introduction of English law, common law, in India to a similar extent to which the Roman law became the law in Europe. Many times it was attempted, but today our English law of torts is applicable in Indian courts, and so on. Now, take for example our own system of parliamentary form of government. The Indian Constitution has adapted the Westminster form of government. For 60 years, not only the English model is there for the central parliament, but for 22 states in India. The American form of presidential government was rejected, and we have adapted that here today. Now, it's a matter of great concern whether the forms of that government we are still maintaining and not its content and purpose. In fact, that might be the subject matter of the next lecture. But nevertheless, that Westminster form is still maintained. And look at the administration of justice which we have in India. Basically patterned on the English administration of justice. It's an adversarial system which we have got. The judge is known for its impartiality. The presumption of innocence is there. The system of precedence is there. And so on. So much so that our constitution said in one of its articles that all the laws prevailing prior to the constitution will continue to operate, and for 60 years they continue to operate. We have the rule of law in our country, and it's amazing that one of the most prolific litigation today is based upon the English system of we call writs, that is the famous writ of habeas corpus, well known in India, imagine that. Writ of mandamus, these are all not only English expressions but perhaps derived from the Latin. We have the writ of prohibition, we have the writ of quo warranto, we have the writ of certiorari, and all this is mentioned in the constitution. The most elementary lawyer today in India generally goes for writ litigation, and in the end of his petition to the Supreme Court he will mention one of these writs. And it's so, therefore, these very writs are what the English legal system had way back in 15th and 16th century. Our Indian Contract Act of 1872 was essentially drafted by that great Sir Frederick Pollock. And he said, basically we have drawn upon the English contracts system. He put in a bit of New York law, if you please, but nevertheless, it was today the Indian Contract Act still governs for us. And you would be amazed at some of the English law which we still cite, including those in civil wrongs. The famous Donoghue versus Stevens was given a judgment by a Scotsman, Lord Atkin. But it's the basis for civil wrongs today. The basis for the law of evidence is done by that great Sir James Stevens, extraordinary man who became a judge later on in the English King's Bench. He drafted this code of evidence law. And so we today have basically the English system it's amazing to you, if any of your students are going to law students will find, all the textbooks which we are today referring, in spite of over 60 years of independence, are the basic English textbooks. We have Salmon on jurisprudence. He was a New Zealander, but he drew all the jurisprudence from England. We have Anson on contract, a famous jurist who was here in Oxford. We have Chitty and Cheshire on the law of contract. And of course the famous May's parliamentary practice. Whose parliamentary practice? Of England. So we have tremendous problems in Parliament. We have borrowed the English parliamentary privilege system, and Mr. Macon will tell you how often there is a breach of privilege and people want to take action. So what do? We look to May's parliamentary practice, not of today, but the edition which was there, if you can get it, of 1950. Why? Because our constitution says all the privileges of the House of Commons at the date of the constitution shall prevail. And so the privileges of the House of Commons are embodied in the constitution. And we apply the law of privilege as it is in 1950. Now, other Commonwealth countries like Australia modify it, but India still continues with that. So, if you have an old edition of May's parliamentary practice at Oxford, please preserve it and send it to India. We have Fry on specific performance, And we have all the famous interpretation statutes like Maxwell's interpretation. So we are in heart and soul in the English common law system. Now, we still preserve that, but perhaps sometimes we are in a situation where we might say the forms are maintained without its contents. And that is where I think we speak of our Westminster style of parliamentary government, perhaps still there, but not in its purpose and contents. We have of late developed certain tendencies which perhaps are undermining that system. And this is the testing time for India. It's a matter of great regret that parliamentary democracy, though it has the forms of Indian system, it may not be having the content and the purpose. Parliament is not allowed to function. Unruly scenes take place in Parliament. The last session of Parliament, or the monsoon session, was totally disrupted by the opposition, who claim a fundamental right to disrupt Parliament. Now these are disturbing trends, and one has to deal with that. But at the end of it, my friends, and those who are in Oxford here, our traditions in law of the English legal system are strong and firm and firmly rooted. I do not believe that it can be ever changed. And if it did change, it will be a total chaos. Thank you very much.
It's now my pleasure to welcome to the podium Mr. A.J. Markan. Mr. Markan is the Minister of State in the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports in the Government of India. He is also the chair of the delegation of Indian MPs who are part of the Chevening Parliamentarians programme being hosted in Oxford during this past week. Mr. Markan has a long and successful career in youth politics before transitioning to national politics as a Member of Parliament from the New Delhi constituency. And I have to add one additional fact. He is a graduate of chemistry, an honours graduate of chemistry, so has a natural link to me with a similar background. So, Mr. Markan.
At the outset, I would like to thank the Oxford Indian Society for having organized this symposium. I think the topics which you have chosen are quite relevant in present times. If you look at the UK-India relationship, the basis or the history lies in the fact that everything started with economics and commerce. And if you look at the Indo-UK relationship now, at the moment, I think again we have moved around a full circle. In 2011, the bilateral trade between UK and India rose by 26% to 16.4 billion UK pounds. Out of 1,200 companies which Indians operate in Europe, 700 are based in UK alone. In 2010, India became the third largest investor in UK after China and United States. In 2011 alone, 81 Indian companies, 81 projects were started by Indian companies, which gave employment to 5,454 people here in Great Britain. So we have moved around the full circle, but perhaps the direction has gone a bit opposite. So the Indians have started investing in UK, and if you look at the trends, I think the foreign direct investment is more into UK than it is into India from UK. Besides, if we now look at what should be the future of ties between India and UK, I think the markets will take care itself as far as the economics and commerce is concerned. But I think what the government should do is something more than this. India has the largest basket in the world of working population. We are 840 million youngsters who are less than 35 years of age. And nowhere else in the world such a large number of youngsters exist in any other country of the world. We are expected to grow at a rate of 1% per year. 5/6 of this growth would be the growth of working population alone. So we are talking about growth of working population. We are talking about the working population in our country. But where the opportunity is, the challenges are also there. And what is the challenge? At the moment, the entire working population of India, out of that, 1/3 are uneducated. And it is estimated that if we go the same way as we are going now, after 20 years, it would be 1/6 of the working population which still would be uneducated. So if we want India to play a more meaningful role in the world, and if we want a better future of the world, I'm not talking about India alone, because the largest number of working population in the world is in India. So whatever happens in India as far as this working population, the young population is concerned, the impact would not only be in India, but it would be global, including UK. So what the challenge before us is how to see to it that this working population, these 840 million youngsters in India at the moment which are growing, these people, they are properly educated and they are imparted proper skills. And this is, I think, where the challenge lies, and this is something where the governments or the institutions like Oxford and others, we need to work in tandem. In 2005, when Prime Minister Blair visited India, we signed a new initiative. A new initiative was launched, which is known as UKIERI. It is UK India Education and Research Initiative. The second phase of which was signed again in 2011. We need to further build on that. But the best thing is, the silver lining is the British Council, which is doing a great job in India. And I'm happy that the head of British Council in India is also present here. They have set a target of imparting in English education to 100 million Indians, out of which I think 17 million they have already imparted English training, and at the moment they are giving training to 750,000 teachers in the country in English language, which would further be able to teach English language throughout the country. But the best thing which they have done is they have tied up directly with the governments of Bihar and Assam. In both these cases, with the governments of Bihar and Assam, they are engaged with them in Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan in both these states. So this is something which the institutions like British Council needs to do more with the states like Bihar and Assam and other states which have largest number of uneducated people and who require more education and more skill. Besides, I was listening to the Vice Chancellor yesterday, and today also he mentioned about the Oxford's partnership with institutes like All India Institute of Medical Sciences. I think on these things of research and education, experience and help of institutions like Oxford is required. And with these things, I think it would not only help India, it would not only strengthen the relationship between India and UK, but it would also help world to be a better place to live in. Thank you very much.
On the panel, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning. I would like to start by thanking the Oxford Indian Society for inviting me here to this symposium today. This is my first invitation to Oxford, which is actually one more than I've received from my daughter, who has actually been studying here for 2 years. But I'm very grateful for that, and I'm delighted she managed to wake up for probably the first time on a Saturday morning for getting here for 9 o'clock, so thank you, Hannah. What I would like to talk about this morning are 3 areas which I believe are very important to strengthen the UK-India relationship: education, cultural relations and English. And no one here today, I know, will question the importance of education to the overall relationship between India and the UK. Like many countries, we are both facing unprecedented social and economic challenges, and we recognise that our future depends on developing and making better use of the intellectual capital invested in our young people. And during my time in India, I've been struck by the multitude of actions that are taking place in the education sphere. The expansion of higher education, the Right to Education Act, and the new National Secondary Education Programme, the RMSA, to just name a few. But above all else, what truly staggers me is when we look at the numbers. 600 million people, 50% of the population, under the age of 25. 500 million young people needed to be trained in the next 10 years. 220 million children currently in the education system. 40 million new university places to be found in the next 10 years. The challenge is enormous. Closer collaboration in education will benefit our societies at every level. It will help build greater understanding between our peoples, help economic development, and help improve research and education capacity to address some of the global agendas that we face in the world today. And there is no doubt that we are already seeing increasing engagement across a wide range of education initiatives that the UK and India cooperate on. And the Vice-Chancellor has already highlighted the work that Oxford are doing and has been doing for many, many years. However, we need to continue with our efforts to explore new avenues for collaboration in the cutting-edge areas of science, technology development, as well as social sciences and humanities, through joint research opportunities and strategic institutional partnerships. And over the last 5 years, the UK-India Education Research Initiative, UKERI, as the Minister pointed out, has played a pivotal role in establishing a step change in the educational relationship between our two countries, supporting 650 new links and collaborative research projects. Research Council UK has also increased funding to support research excellence from £1 million to £100 million in the last 3 years. And HESA figures now show that the UK has 52 award programmes delivered collaboratively in India, with over 8,000 Indian students enrolled, a 13% increase on last year. And we also need to continue our efforts with regard to policy and reform challenges. For example, we agree that mutual recognition of degrees and diplomas awarded by the education institutions of both the countries will be extremely helpful to enhance student mobility. And we want to enhance the mobility of students, from India to the UK and from the UK to India. Currently, there are around 30,000 students from India studying in the UK. It's only a few hundred UK students study in India each year. And for mutual understanding, we need to address this imbalance. There will be at least 4 million Indian students who will be able to afford to study overseas.